Hey, welcome to another decisions training video. In this video, we are going to be discussing the Go Async step. So before we get into this, let me preface this by explaining the difference between synchronous and asynchronous behavior in decisions. So this is a key consideration when you are designing your flows about if you want parts of your flow to run synchronously or asynchronously. There is no one better than the other in general. They just provide particular uses and pros and cons depending on what you're trying to use them for in your flow. So for example, synchronous allows for data to transfer between steps because you are still waiting on a step to complete in order to receive that data, such as maybe a fetch or a run flows for list step, and then you can use that data later in your flow. It also prevents further steps from executing if an error arises in the step that is causing the asynchronous behavior, starting the asynchronous behavior, or possibly one right after it. So asynchronous functionality, on the other hand, allows for processes to be completed in the background on a separate queue, which allows the main flow to continue without waiting on processes to execute. This can provide quicker API calls, quicker database updates, or even sending emails out if you don't have any further processes that need to be completed in the flow. Also, it is important to note that some steps and decisions are either synchronous or asynchronous by default, with most of them being synchronous by default. So, now let's get into the Go Async step. What this step does is it allows for any preceding steps after this step to be run in an asynchronous fashion. How this step works is it runs all the rest of your proceeding steps after the Go Async step on a separate worker queue in the thread jobs. This completes in the background so that users are not left waiting on this to complete before the end of an API call or the end of a step that's taking a while but just has a data upload so you don't need the data afterward. It can be used in a variety of circumstances. Every single worker queue is given a number, and Decisions ensures that each worker queue that it creates is not named the same number as a separate worker queue that was created by the same flow step running multiple times. Now, there are some things to be mindful of when using this step. One, it is not this cure-all to all of your slowness problems in your decisions environment. For example, anytime you are running something in an asynchronous manner, the flow context changes to system, which can be a problem for particular processes that you may be trying to run. For example, if you need the initiating user flow account, you can't use this step without passing in that data somewhere else. Please keep in mind that running processes on threads does not mean your computer can just kick back and take a day off because it's on a separate thread queue now. It still processes those, it's just running in the background as opposed to being running synchronously in the foreground to the user. So you can still run into thread exhaustion if you don't use these steps correctly. So let me give a demo of how to use these steps in your decisions flow. All right, here we are inside of my decisions environment. Here I have a process that is going to collect a set of email addresses, and then depending on whether we specify, it will either go async or run in a synchronous manner. It will then fetch the attachments from a database to list onto the emails, and then put those attachments onto the emails to be sent out to the email list. So that's how this process works. Now, let me show you the behavior when we run this in a synchronous manner. So I'm going to debug this. I am not going to check the async button, and I'm going to run it. You see how we have to wait on the fetch. It's going to take a little bit. Attaches the send emails, and then boom, step is done. So everything ran in order here, right? And everything was running in full view of the user. Let me go to the thread job report and show you what this looks like. So here in the decisions thread job report, you can see all the different queues that have been created. Now the naming convention of this is worker hyphen the number. So as you can see from this particular list, alphabetized, there is no worker thread. Everything ran in the foreground, so there is no thread job that was created. Now let's run this in an asynchronous manner and show you what happens. So I'm going to debug this. I'm going to start debugging, and as soon as it goes asynchronous, the process is going to perform as we expect and go to the end. But if we look at our thread job report now, you'll see that we have worker-1 as a worker queue, and this was currently running during our process. this is a list of all of the thread jobs in the background. So as you can see, this is one of the thread jobs that is being run in the background on a separate queue from the rest of your processes. Decisions creates this name by default, and it is not something that can be specified in the Go Async step. Now there's an important interaction that I want to make you aware of real quick. So if we go back to that flow, you'll see here that I have put my main flow inside of a subflow. Now, if I were to run this process, which hits the Go Async step, it is going to continue to run every step after it in an async manner, even if this main flow was not run asynchronously. And let me show you what I mean by this by adding a delay step. If the asynchronous manner were to stop just in here, then we would be waiting on this delay step in a synchronous manner and the work queue would have ended. However, that's not what happens. If I debug this flow, it takes us time, and now if I go to the worker queue after this flow is processed, you can see that even after the subflow processed, we still have a separate worker queue, worker 2, that was created in that subflow that is still running. So you have to keep this in mind when you're designing, that as soon as you put in that Go Async step, until your whole flow ends, even flows outside of this subflow, you're going to be running all of those in the background in an asynchronous manner. So that's how you use the Go Async step in decisions. Thank you for watching.